j'accueille
I'd like to
le
welcome
vice-amiral
Vice
d'escadre
Admiral
Pascal
Pascal
Osser,
Osser, who is hello.
Vous êtes le directeur
You
général
are
de
managing
l'Institut
director
FMES,
of
la
the
Fondation
Mediterranean Foundation for Strategic Studies, a think tank specializing in strategic issues in Southern Europe, specifically Euro-Mediterranean area, the Middle East and Africa. This institution is also an expert institute in the field of global maritime issues. You were prefect for the English Channel and the North Sea, and you have an extensive operational experience in maritime traffic areas, Mediterranean, Persian Gulf, and Indian Ocean, the zones that are essential to global trade. You have also held important positions with two ministers of defense at the Directorate of General of Armaments and at the Armed Forces, particularly in the field of international relations. Your analysis will therefore shed light on the impact of geopolitical tensions on competitiveness and sovereignty. Thank you.
Merci Gerson. Monsieur le directeur général, cher François, mesdames et messieurs, je suis ravi d'être là. C'est toujours amusant de se faire introduire par un amiral à distance.
By an admiral at a distance. It doesn't make me much younger because it is true that he was under my orders on a frigate 20 years ago.
Et ça me permet de... Je suis tout à fait en ligne avec ce qu'il a dit.
I agree with what he has shared.
On m'avait demandé de parler des zones dangereuses dans lesquelles vous allez naviguer. Je parle pour les plus jeunes.
The danger zones you're going to be navigating.
Et en fait, à mon avis, la question d'aujourd'hui n'est pas tant une question de zone qu'une question d'époque. Ce qu'il faut comprendre, c'est que... Je peux même passer la carte que j'avais préparée, mais que je n'ai pas détaillée plus que ça parce qu'elle est autocompréhensible. Mais le danger sera partout, beaucoup plus fort. Moi, ça fait 45 ans que je suis dans les enjeux stratégiques et les enjeux de défense, notamment en mer. Et je n'ai jamais vu depuis 45 ans autant de tensions, autant de rivalité, autant de compétition qui dégénère instantanément en confrontation et puis après revient en compétition. Cette espèce de chaos qu'on ressent tous. L'idée force que je voudrais vous faire passer, c'est que ce n'est pas une anomalie, c'est une tendance lourde. Et quand vous aurez mon âge, pour les plus jeunes d'entre vous, vous serez dans ce monde-là. On est parti pour 50 ans, au minimum. Pourquoi ? Parce qu'on vit une rupture. On ne vit pas une crise. Moi, je suis de la génération des crises. C'est-à-dire, toute ma vie, j'ai réglé des anomalies, des cas non conformes. Mais on savait qu'après, une fois qu'on aurait réglé la crise, on reviendrait à l'état initial. L'état final était plus ou moins le même que l'état initial. Voilà.
But we knew we'd get through the crisis and then come back to a situation that we knew.
Je vous expliquerai pourquoi. Et puis on avait des sauts, des problèmes qu'on réglait. Aujourd'hui, on ne vit pas une crise. Aujourd'hui, on vit une rupture. Et la différence entre une crise et une rupture, c'est que l'état final,
and the
on ne sait pas qu'est-ce
consequences that we don't know what's coming, we don't know how it will end.
Définitivement,
But it will
fondamentalement différent de l'état
be
initial.
different from the initial
Il y aura
state.
un avant et un après
There'll be an
complètement
after
différent.
and a before.
Et ça change
It will
tout.
be completely
Ça
different
change
from
tout
each other.
intellectuellement.
That changes everything
Parce
intellectually.
qu'il faut non
Because
seulement régler l'anomalie, on est en
not only do we have to fix the anomaly, we're out of balance, the Houthis are shooting, the climate is heating, all that.
Mais en plus,
But
on
on
sait
top
qu'on ne
of
reviendra
that,
pas en
we
arrière.
know that
Donc il
we're
faut
not coming
imaginer un
backwards.
futur
So we know we
possible.
have to imagine a
Et
possible
chacun fait
future.
ce travail,
And
d'imaginer
each
son
one is
futur.
doing that work.
Vous pouvez être sûr que les
We're
futurs
imagining
possibles sont très différents. Si
the
vous êtes
possible
turc,
futures
si
are
vous
very
êtes
different,
chinois,
whether
si vous
you're
êtes américain,
Turkish,
si vous êtes
Chinese, or
européen,
American, or
ou si vous
European,
êtes ivoirien.
or from
Et
Ivory
il
Coast.
faut imaginer le
But
futur
we have
possible,
to imagine a possible
comprendre
future,
que les autres ont d'autres futurs, et
understand
après
that
élaborer une
others have
stratégie
another
pour
future,
aboutir
and
le
then
plus proche
elaborate a
possible, le plus près possible au futur
strategy
que vous souhaitez.
come as close as
Et éviter
possible
ce
to
que
the
vous ne
future
souhaitez
that you want,
Ça,
and avoid what you don't want.
ce que nos grands-parents faisaient très simplement,
What our
parce que c'était leur
grandparents
monde,
used to do very
on a
simply
désappris à le
because
faire
it was
depuis
their
un demi-siècle.
world. We've stopped
Puisqu'on était
doing it
sur une
for the
tendance
last half century
lourde,
because we were on a
permanente. On
tendency
était,
that
en fait,
was
si je devais simplifier les
permanent.
choses,
So in order to
Nous vivons la
simplify
fin
things, I'd like to
d'une
say that we're
période
living the
qui
end
a
of a
commencé il y a 2
period
siècles
that started
de
2 centuries
convergence,
ago,
de
a time of
convergence, une grande
convergence,
convergence vers le modèle
a
européen.
great convergence
En fait, il y a
toward
2
the
siècles,
European
en
model.
Europe, on a inventé la machine à
2
vapeur.
centuries ago,
Ça a
in
c'est
Europe,
pas
we
tout à fait un hasard
invented the
c'est
steam
pas un
engine.
hasard si c'est ici que ça s'est inventé, mais enfin bon, je ne veux pas rentrer dans les détails. Et la machine à vapeur a
And that
donné la
steam
révolution
engine
industrielle,
brought
une
the
supériorité économique,
the
une
industrial
supériorité politique,
revolution,
une
superiority
supériorité
in
militaire,
economy,
géopolitique,
politics,
scientifique,
military,
culturelle,
geopolitics,
fondée sur
scientifics,
des modèles
cultural,
qui ont été
and
créés
all this was
ici en
founded
Europe,
on models that were
avec,
created here
parce
in
que c'était
Europe,
le fruit d'une réflexion
because it was the
philosophique et
fruit of
culturelle
a
extrêmement forte que je ne vais
philosophical
pas détailler,
reflection that
mais
is very
fondée,
long,
dont
but
le moteur de
I
base
won't go
était
into detail.
l'économie.
But the main
Et
engine of all that
cette
was the
grande
economy.
convergence avec des hauts, des bas,
And that
des
great
tensions, bien sûr, tout ça ne se fait
convergence
pas
with ups and
comme un fleuve
downs,
tranquille.
all that was
Cette grande
just peaceful,
convergence,
but that great convergence
elle a eu une apothéose
has had
après la chute du mur, qui
a
était la
zenith
dernière confrontation, mais qui est une
after
confrontation intra-européenne, hein, parce que c'était un concept européen
fall
contre un autre
of the
concept
wall,
européen. Et depuis
of the
30 ans, en
Berlin
gros, on a
Wall.
eu une espèce d'apogée.
And
Et cette grande
so
convergence,
that's
elle était
been
très
like an
confortable pour les Européens, parce que nous, on était au
apex
centre du jeu.
in the last 30 years, and that was great
Alors,
because
après,
we
on a appelé
Europeans,
cette
we were in the
européanisation
center of
du
that
monde, on l'a appelé
game.
l'occidentalisation
So
du monde,
that
quand les Européens sont partis aux
Europeanization of the
États-Unis,
world,
et que
we
ça fait
call
une
it
espèce de résonance.
Westernization, because then the Europeans went
Enfin,
to
c'était
the
quand même le logiciel
to the
européen.
Americas,
Aujourd'hui,
but basically it was
logiciel
still
qui
the
était si
European model.
confortable pour nous,
And today, this operating
au lieu
software,
d'avoir une
which
grande
was so
convergence, on vit une
comfortable
grande
for us,
divergence.
instead of
Comme
a
un Big
great
Bang.
convergence, we're
Comme un
living
Big
a
Bang.
big divergence, like
Chacun
a big
reprend
bang.
enfin,
And each
part
one
dans un sens
is
différent. Et
going
pour nous,
in a
Européens,
different way.
c'est
And
un
for
défi
us
intellectuel majeur.
Europeans, it's a very strong
D'abord, c'est beaucoup moins confortable.
intellectual
C'est sûr.
challenge. First
C'est
of
tellement
all, it's
confortable
much
d'avoir
less
une chose
comfortable.
qui nous ralliait. Alors, nous, on
It's
faisait des
so
leçons,
it
des
was so
bons points, des
comfortable.
mauvais
We would,
points.
we would
C'était-
give lessons to everybody and
c'était
give
aux
good
autres de faire
points,
les
bad
efforts.
points. It was
Aujourd'hui,
others who
c'est
had
très
to make the
inconfortable,
efforts.
et
Today,
c'est
it's very
intellectuellement
uncomfortable
très
because
inconfortable aussi, parce que c'est une grosse blessure narcissique.
also intellectual, it's a
Les gens ne veulent
great
pas devenir européens.
narcissistic wound.
Et le modèle
People
européen
don't
ne
want to
sera pas le
become
modèle
European,
mondial.
and the European
monde ne sera pas
model
européen.
will not be the world
Même les Américains ne sont plus
model.
européens.
Even the Americans
C'est
aren't
tout mettre des
European anymore.
occidentalisations et
It's
tout,
a
et tout cette espèce de
de-Westernization
qui nous touche tous.
of the world.
Et alors, ça a un
And so,
impact extrêmement fort.
So it has a
sur
very
la
strong
marchande.
impact on
Parce que,
a
comme je vous
merchant
l'ai dit,
navy
le modèle
because, as I said,
occidental,
the
qui est un modèle
the
européen,
Western
qui a
model,
200
which is
ans,
a European model that is now
impact
200 years
énorme en
old, you
termes
can
de
imagine
culture.
the huge impact in
Ce qui fait que nous
terms
avons
of
à penser en
culture.
dehors de ça.
It's very difficult
Porter
for
sur
us to
le
think
commerce. Et le
outside
commerce,
of
vous
that
allez bien, c'est
box.
pour savoir, le commerce, c'est la mer.
So trade
Donc
is
vous êtes-
the sea.
Vous êtes au
So
cœur,
you
vous êtes au
are
cœur
at
de
the
ce
heart
dispositif.
of this
Un modèle, je
organization,
répète, un modèle mondial,
a
homogène,
world model
selon
that's
nos règles,
homogeneous
dont
according
la
to
mer
our
est
rules.
le vaisseau sanguin,
And the rule and the
mer
sea
et le commerce sur mer est le cœur,
is
enfin,
at the
le cœur,
heart
et le-
of
pas tout à fait
all
le cœur,
this.
mais le système qui irrigue
it's
tout ce modèle.
It's the system that irrigates. The sea is
Et
what
aujourd'hui-
irrigates this whole model.
Et vous avez compris que je vais détailler un peu parce que ça va impacter complètement votre vie.
But
de marin.
today, and you understand this will be
Aujourd'hui, ce modèle
impacting your whole
explose.
life,
On ne
this
sait pas dans
model
quoi.
is exploding.
Tout ce qu'on sait, c'est que
We
le
don't know
centre où
towards
nous
what.
étions,
We just
le
know that the
logiciel
center
que nous
that
avions
we
fait,
were,
il
the
se
software
retrouve
we had
quelque
made,
part,
is
il
now-
existe encore, bien sûr.
it
Mais il est
still
plus au centre
exists,
du
but
jeu.
it's not in the
Dans un Big
center of
Bang,
the
il y a plus de
game.
centre.
There's in a big bang, there's no center.
Quand je dis ça, on pourrait croire
When
qu'on
I
revient
say
en
that, we
arrière.
could think that we're
Dans ce petit
going
propos
backwards.
introductif, je voudrais
So
quand
in
même
this little
préciser,
introduction, I'd like
c'est pas le
to.
think tank, hein, j'essaye de conceptualiser les choses pour vous donner des idées, des concepts intellectuels.
What I want to
Décrire
do
le monde.
is bring
Avec toutes les
concept to
imprécisions, hein,
help you
il y a
to
des
think
signes,
and
faut-
describe
faut-
the world.
Je suis pas un gourou, hein, je vous
I'm
donne
not a
des
guru.
pistes
I'm
intellectuelles
just
de
giving
compréhension.
you food for thought.
Ça n'est pas un retour en arrière.
We're not going backwards. We're not coming back to the 19th century. We could think, oh, okay, well, maybe we're coming backwards. Great convergence, now big divergence, maybe back to back to the future. We're coming back to the 19th century. But no, when I was born, there were 3 billion people on this planet. Today, we're more than 8 billion. So in the life of one man, we have gone from 3 to 8 billion in a planet that hasn't moved. So of course, the interactions, the interdependencies between these 8 billion people have nothing to do with what existed when I was born. So we won't go backwards. Another thing, the planet hasn't moved. 3 billion, 8 billion, obviously a great word that comes back every time we think is the word
Il n'y en aura
scarcity.
pas pour tout le monde.
There won't be enough
En
for
tout
everybody.
cas, c'est ça qu'il y a dans la tête de tout le monde.
At least that's what's in
Donc,
everybody's mind.
cette espèce de grande convergence, tout le
So
monde
this
revient
great
comme nous, gagnant,
convergence,
gagnant, tout
everybody
ça,
becoming like
c'est terminé.
us, that's finished.
Dans la tête des gens, c'est terminé.
In the minds of people, that's
Donc
finished.
vous comprenez que
So
ça
you
rajoute
understand that that
petite
brings
tension à tout ce que je
another
viens de dire. Donc
tension
déjà,
on
on est en Big
everything
Bang,
else I've
déjà, ça
said.
nous
So we're in a Big
ça nous
Bang.
met cul par-dessus tête.
So
Par nous, les
we're kind
Européens.
of upside down
Et en
for
plus,
us, the
il y a de la tension
Europeans,
partout
and on
parce
top
que tout
of
le
that,
monde se
there's
dit qui va
tension
perdre, qui va
everywhere
gagner.
because everybody's thinking
Et
who's
comme
going
nous,
to
on est
win,
au
who's
centre
going to
du jeu,
lose.
en haut de la
And we used to
pyramide,
be on top of the
tout le
pyramid
monde est
at
à
the
peu près
center of
d'accord
the
pour dire que
game.
nous, on va perdre.
Everybody seems to agree on the
Et
fact
plus
that
ou
we
moins
are
fort.
going to lose, more or
T'as
less.
envie de perdre, je sais pas.
Okay,
Mais
so
en tout
maybe
cas,
you want to
toujours est-il
lose,
que,
but at
ça
least
change complètement le logiciel.
it does change the software completely.
Le nouveau chef d'état-major des armées, le
The
général
new head
Mandon,
of
il
the
a dit
French army,
il y a 3
General
semaines,
Mandon, said
phrase
3
qui-
weeks
moi,
ago,
je
a
le sais bien ça.
sentence that
Ça
for
craque
me
de partout.
summarizes, says it's
Vous pouvez
cracking
voir sur
everywhere.
Internet, c'était à la commission de la défense
It's
de
cracking
l'Assemblée
everywhere.
nationale.
That was his
Ça craque
phrase.
de partout. Donc voilà, c'est ma petite introduction de mon
So
introduction.
that's the little
Le
introduction
sol
to my
se dérobe sous nos
introduction.
pieds.
The floor is
Ça veut
running
pas
away
dire
from
que
under
c'est
our
la fin du
feet.
monde,
It
pas
doesn't
du
mean
tout.
it's the end of the
Ça veut dire
world.
simplement que les
It just
anciens
means
logiciels
that the
sont
previous
caduques
softwares are
et que la
obsolete.
génération
And the
qui est au pouvoir
generation
aujourd'hui,
that is
celle
in
qui
power
aspire,
today
qui va
and
devenir, de
that
toute façon,
will
même pas
come
si
to
je ne
power.
pas, je parle aux plus jeunes. De toute façon, vous aurez les mains sur les manettes un jour ou l'autre, vous commencez à les avoir. Vous avez à réinventer un
You
modèle.
have to, the
Vous
ones
avez à
aspiring
réinventer un modèle.
to power. You
Le
have a
président
model
Biden
to
disait,
reinvent.
du temps encore il avait toute sa tête, il disait on vit
President
une période
Biden
qui
used to
arrive
say,
une fois par siècle.
we are living in
Il
an
avait
epoch
raison.
that happens
le même
once a
sentiment.
century. I have the same
On vit,
feeling.
on vit un moment,
We are living a
période qui
moment,
n'existe
a
qu'une fois par
period that only
Quelle
happens
chance.
once in a
Quelle chance
century.
j'ai, moi, de
So
vivre cette
how lucky,
période
what
avant de
good
mourir.
fortune
Et quelle chance vous avez, vous, d'avoir un monde à construire.
to have
exactement de ça
a
dont il
world to build.
Alors
That's
maintenant,
what it's all about.
j'ai essayé pour
So
introduire
now,
ce
in
colloque,
order to
j'ai
introduce
essayé
this,
de
I
trouver,
also
d'identifier les
tried
grands
to
points
identify
qui
the
vont toucher
great
la marine
points
marchande,
that
dont vous
will
touchez.
touch the
J'en ai trouvé
merchant
5,
navy,
il y en a
and I
certainement
found
d'autres, hein,
5.
mais le premier impact concret,
The first concrete
c'est,
impact
et vous avez trouvé que c'est logique avec ce que j'ai dit avant, c'est les règles du jeu
is the
disparaissent,
rules
sont en
of the
train de
game
disparaître.
are
Disparaître.
disappearing.
Donc toutes les règles du jeu sur lesquelles on a construit
The
notre
rules of the
système, y
game
compris
that we
la
use to
réglementation, la
construct
façon
our
dont on
system,
faisait, dont on naviguait sur mer,
the
dont on faisait du commerce sur
laws,
mer.
the way we used to do
Tout ça
trade and
disparaît.
navigation at
Il n'y a pas de
sea, all
jour,
that
alors
is
ça commence par le droit
disappeering.
international, hein, il n'y a
It
pas de
starts with
jour
international
actuellement
law.
où le
Today,
droit
there isn't a
international
day
n'est pas,
when international law
plafonné, si je puis dire,
isn't
enfin, je ne vais pas parler de façon triviale, n'est
broken,
pas enfreint, quelque part
trespassed,
dans l'indifférence
somewhere in the
générale.
world,
Tout le
in
monde s'en
total
fiche.
indifference.
Tout le monde
Nobody
s'en fiche.
cares.
En fait, on ne cite le droit international que pour
We
embêter
only
celui
talk about
qui a
international
des
law
fins
just to
géopolitiques,
bother
pour embêter celui
the others.
qui l'enfreint. Mais en fait,
But in
personne ne
fact,
croit qu'il va
nobody
respecter le droit
thinks
international.
that
Personne.
they're going
Je
to
peux vous donner des
respect
exemples
international
partout,
law.
bien
I
sûr,
can
les
give you
exemples les plus
examples
connus,
everywhere. So the
le droit de la
greatest
guerre,
example,
puisqu'il y a
of
des
course,
guerres qui
is
se
in
généralisent partout.
the law
On se fiche du droit de la guerre,
at war.
donc c'est même pas
The law, there were
c'est même pas une
rules for
question.
war, and now
Mais
none of that is important.
regardez, vous avez des pays qui n'existent
Look,
pas
you
sur le
have
papier, hein, qui créent
countries
des ports,
that don't
qui
exist
négocient
on
avec
the
des grands
paper,
industriels,
but
voilà,
are
des
creating
grands États,
ports.
Berbera au Somaliland. Voilà,
Berbera
c'est un
in
port qui marche, qui
Somaliland,
fonctionne, qui gagne
it's
beaucoup
a
d'argent,
it's a
avec
port
des
that
conditions
works and
fiscales,
makes a lot
etc.,
of money.
avec, l'Éthiopie qui en veut en faire un port militaire.
Ethiopia
Bon, alors, ça fait
wants to
hurler les
make
voisins qui
a
sont pas d'accord,
military
mais en fait,
port
tout le monde,
out of
personne ne
it.
se pose la question de
Makes,
savoir, mais est-ce que c'est légal, pas légal?
is
C'est
it
pas la
legal?
question. Ce
Not
n'est pas
legal?
la
That's not the
question.
question.
Le droit international n'existe plus. Le droit
International
international
law doesn't
maritime.
exist anymore.
Moi, je suis de cette génération. Je suis rentré dans la marine en 80.
I came
82,
into the
Montego Bay.
Navy in 1981.
Baigné là-dedans.
82 was Montego
Mais,
Bay.
le jour où les Chinois disent la mer de Chine du Sud, c'est
The day of the Chinese say that southern China is my zone, we can do what we want, we can condemn them in The Hague, but what does it change in reality? Nothing.
Rien.
Nothing.
Quand les Russes disent
When the
c'était avant la
Russians
guerre,
say that was
la
before
mer
the
Noire, la
war,
moitié de la mer
when
Noire,
they
c'est
say
une
the
zone,
half of Black Sea is a
russe,
EEZ,
plus
as a
personne
Russian
n'ose
EEZ,
naviguer
nobody
dedans sans autorisation, personne ne
Nobody should
quand
navigate in there without
l'interprétation de la ZE par les
authorization.
Russes, par les Chinois, par les Turcs,
And when even the
c'est
interpretation of
finalement
that economic zone by
l'interprétation
the
du mot
Chinese and the
territorial,
Russians,
ils vont
they
dire oui, une ZE c'est comme une eau territoriale,
they
ça m'appartient,
consider it as at a
ça
territorial
m'appartient.
waters, then everybody says, oh,
Donc
okay, all right.
vous pouvez pas, un bateau militaire ne peut pas rentrer dedans et
So
faire des
a
exercices sans demander
military
d'autorisation.
boat
C'est
cannot
absolument pas
come in
légal,
without
ça n'a rien à voir avec le droit.
asking their
Mais c'est comme ça.
authorization. It's not
Et
legal.
de
That's not the
facto, c'est
law.
comme ça que ça se
But
passe.
that's what it is. That is what is happening in fact.
C'est pour vous donner un exemple.
So it's to give you an example.
Certainement plein vous-même, puisque vous êtes
You
des
probably
praticiens
have many
de
examples
la mer,
yourselves
vous
because
savez
you
la
are
question.
practitioners of
Le
the
droit de la
sea.
mer, aujourd'hui, tout le
But
monde s'en fiche. Et
the
alors, si
law,
on veut aller un
the
peu plus
rules
loin,
of the
il y a une
sea,
logique derrière ça,
nobody cares
c'est
today.
que le droit de
And
la
there's a
mer,
logic behind that.
le droit de la mer a été fait par des gens qui utilisaient la mer. Or, il se trouve que les gens qui utilisaient la mer, c'est les gens qui faisaient du commerce.
The rules of the sea were made by people who were doing trade at sea with a great convergence towards this European style of world. So it was done by the Dutch, the English, the Americans, people, the maritime powers. But the powers that are changing things today are all continental powers: China, Russia, Iran, Turkey. They're all continental power. We know that the French, we know we're kind of continental power. We're a country of peasants in France. When we have a field, it's mine. And if you want to come through my field, you ask for permission. That's how I see things. There's not this sort of logic of co-property and a flow and flux, free flux. It's a thing of people at sea. But today, the rising powers have a way of thinking that is continental, and they are taking control of the sea, and they can change a lot of things for those who are at sea tomorrow. Tomorrow, maybe to enter the South China Sea, you will have to ask authorization from Shanghai, and everybody will find it very normal. You might even have to pay a tax every time you pass through, and everybody will say, well, yeah, it's normal, it's theirs, it's like a field, or you don't come into your field without asking the owner of the field. It's a completely different software. We did not construct maritime trade that way. Maybe it won't be that way. Maybe China will become a maritime power. There's a third element that we can add to this, is that today we have the technological means to take ownership of the sea. We can go much further, we can hit further, we can win a war without having a frigate. Look at the Houthis, look at the Ukrainians. The sea is closing in, we can see it all. The Mediterranean is becoming a lake. And actually, the big oceans remain the big spaces of freedom, but that's another debate, more strategic, less about trade. But so now we have the means to take ownership of the sea. Go onto the website of the FMES, and we did a study about the territorialization of the maritime spaces. We did it before the Houthis closed the Red Sea. We had said then that the Red Sea could be closed by, we thought it could be by Sudan, because technically it's feasible. Technically, Turkey can block Western Mediterranean. They can do it easily. Now, will we fight for that? We enter. But it's easy. But it was not feasible 50 years ago. So the rules are changing. And this territorialization for you, for those who are at sea, it's really going to change a lot. The fluidity will be reduced. A second factor is the return of geography. We used to be in a world, I don't know if you remember this book, a guy called Thomas Friedman. He called it The World is Flat. It was a world end of the 90s, Thomas Friedman. And on the book we could see a big ball that had been flattened. And he starts the story by saying he's got a problem with his company, with his computer, and he's talking to a Texan guy who's actually he called someone who's actually in Bangalore. And he realizes, yeah, I don't care if he's in Texas or in Bangalore, the world is flat. All I need is someone online who is competent and who can speak English, they can help me work. The distance is not important, the culture doesn't import, is not a problem. The nationality has no more meaning. So it's the great convergence in differentiation. The world is flat. What counts is the competency, the fact that we can work together, and we're all producers, we're all consumers, we're all products, and in the end, and that's the case wherever we are. Well, even that's behind us, because once again, with this Big Bang, identity comes back, nation comes back, personalities and particularities are coming back, personal interests of small human groups, more and more differentiation, and then there's scarcity, so that increases the tensions. So of course the world isn't flat anymore. Geography is coming back, distance is coming back. No luck, you produce your anti-COVID masks at the end of the world. Well, then there won't be any masks for you. It'll take longer to come. Oh, you need it now? Oh, well, sorry, we'll first help the people around us, and then we'll see if we have enough for you. So the distance has become more important. National interests. We saw it with COVID, but we see it with everything. And we see in the Red Sea, the straits become important. These narrow seas, we can take ownership of the sea up to a certain point. All the maritime movements next to coast become very vulnerable. The Houthis, that situation can be applied in everywhere. I can describe very credible scenarios where the trade routes are all blocked or at least really hindered. So physical geography has obviously a strong impact. We've seen it a little bit with piracy, but that's like a joke almost compared to what we're living today. So hence questions about reshoring and flux. And then there's the human geography that's coming back. Contrary to what Thomas Friedman used to say, the guy in Bangalore is not Texan. He's Indian, and he's got his own way of thinking, and he belongs to a country that has its own logic and interests and strategy, and we'll have to take that into account. So no, an Indian is not a Texan. And that's true for the states. It's true for companies. So when you delocalize your company, where'd you go? Do you put it in the Chinese zone, or do you put it more with the zone of America? And when there'll be tension on what you're producing, who's going to choose what camp, what tariffs will be applied, everything has to be rethought. That's geography. That's the human geography of what's happening in people's minds. A country can be next door, but it might be aligned with China while you're aligned with another zone. And so it'll change everything with the way you work with that neighbor. If your company works for a company that works for Israel, your financial director, he's a Muslim, militant, and he considers that Israel is evil on earth. No, he refuses to work for a company that works for Israel. So, well, it's like that. He's allowed to do that. But he's financial director. He has all the competencies. But the world is not flat. And so in the morning, either he decides, I don't work for you, or at worst, he puts a virus in your computers, and your company shuts down. Your crews. What do they have in their minds? It's normal. In a world that is not homogeneous anymore, that is not converging, every individual has his own free will. So you've understood the
Aujourd'hui, le mot
problem.
Israël, pouf, tout de suite, paf, j'ai
It's
senti
fun when
une attention
once I say
particulière. On vit
Israel,
dans un monde, non mais c'est
voila,
ça dit beaucoup de
everybody
choses du
understands
monde dans
what's at
lequel nous vivons.
stake.
Ça dit beaucoup de choses du monde dans
It
lequel nous
says a
vivons.
lot about the world we're living in.
Et ça,
And that,
il y a 30 ans, on aurait pu dire
30 years ago,
c'était pas le sujet.
that wasn't the
Personne
subject.
n'aurait évoqué ça
Nobody would have mentioned that.
sérieusement. Bon, troisième point, la politique
Third point,
l'emporte sur l'économie.
politics takes over
C'est un changement de
economics. That's a change. It's a
Je
paradigm
suis de la
shift.
génération où chaque année,
I come from a
comme disait Clinton pour gagner ses élections dans les années 90.
I came from a generation where economy would drive everything. Everything. Everybody was behind economics. Even the military, we were told to be more into the economy, and today it's the politics have taken over. So many states take decisions that are absurd economically, but so we have to understand that. Putin is not crazy, and Trump is not stupid. I wouldn't spend my holidays with him. But these people have a logic. It's just not the logic from before, and that changes everything. Geopolitics come back everywhere. Geoeconomy come everywhere. Arsenalization, transformation of the economy into a weapon. You can win a war without shooting. The Chinese have understand that we have financial missiles, information missiles, economics missiles. All the antibiotics that are produced in China and India, you can cut all that, and in one day, in 3 months, you kill Europe. And in suffering, because it's going to hurt more than bombs. Voilà. There we go. So it's a weaponization of the economy. Americans, that's important. They've understood why is Trump turning the table around. Because if he was there, I don't think he wouldn't have much to say about the analysis. You know, I work with Iraqis, Turkish people, Germans, Russians. Everybody says the same thing. What I'm saying is not very original. I'm just saying it as clearly as possible. But this vulnerability that is new, the Americans see it very well. That's why the Americans decided they would not save the old world. So they're turning the table around, and now here we're completely lost because our previous savior has now jumped off our airplane. So we're going to have to now pilot our own plane. So there's a schism, a break between, it's a de-Europeanization of America. It's historical. The one who will succeed, who will come after Trump will not be Obama, or will not be someone like that. So what does this mean for those who are at sea, for merchant trade, if politics become important again? Admiral Cluzel said it, the flag becomes important again. Strategic supplies become important again. So we can spend more money to have a fleet that allows us to guarantee the survival of a country and of Europe. Yes, it's worth it. Economically, it's not worth it, but politically, it's vital. And people will ask the politicians to do this. If we need a supply of medication, we will look to the politicians. So all these flag considerations and strategic fleets and protection and cooperation between the civil and the military, all this has become important now. It's a new software, and you are part of that software. So with the return of there's the return of the unforeseeable. Before, we could either foresee a catastrophe, accidents, or all southern countries. The southern countries hadn't understood everything, so they could do things that was really silly. But today, it's not at all that. The unforeseeability comes from big countries. It's everybody, but it has even more weight when it's Trump or Xi Jinping. These are political actors that make choices. The rules of the game are changing, so these are changes that surprise us. So it's not foreseeable. So let's talk about antibiotics. Who can say that in the next 3 years, 3 years, we won't have a crisis of antibiotics? And I'd say if the Ministry of Health was here today, they couldn't say it either. We're saying, oh, we've got plans, we're being careful. Yes, of course, I hope. But today, everything is possible. And there will come from big impacts will come from the big ones, more than from the small countries. Pirates are not a subject anymore. Will we be able to go through Suez? Maybe one day we won't be able to navigate in Western Mediterranean. Maybe the Turks will say, as long as I don't have the Aegean Sea, nobody will go through. And the Chinese will say, yes, I agree. And so who will go? Will we fight or not? Those are the questions. And maybe we'll go all the way around. And those who created their business model on the Aegean Sea and the Suez Canal, and we make their little margin on that business model, well, they'll all fall. Last point. So you understand that all the key notions that were efficiency, zero stock, and all that goes upside down. We need resilience. We need Plan B. We need to lose a bit money on the short term to better to be able to absorb shocks on the long term. Last point, violence, of course. Violence is becoming banal. The use of force is becoming banal. Before, when we spoke of the terrorism, we used to talk about the Lindbergh, that boat that was taken by terrorists. Today, it's Houthi missiles. Tomorrow, it might be missiles from somewhere else. We don't know, but behind there'll be Russian missiles, Chinese missiles. Because Admiral said it today, Europeans, he said the Westerners, but it's the Europeans. The Americans are not Westerners anymore. And even in Europe, the Spanish have said they're not going to go die for Ukrainians or Estonians. So let's also ask the question for us as French people. We have to see the world for what it is. It's painful, but it's the Spanish Prime Minister said the Russian tanks won't come to Madrid. So what happens in Estonia, he doesn't care. It's a scoop. It's breaking news. So we must be realistic. For you who are at sea, missiles, that's become a reality for you. Drones, of course, underwater, mines. That's your reality. So there's risks. So we live in a world, in an unforeseeable world, that's much more violent, each one defending himself. There's no judgment here. It's everyone is defending his own interests. So if you understand how people are coming through, it's no moral judgment. The last word is Darwin. We must adapt. It's not the strongest who will win, and maybe not even the most intelligent. It's the one who adapts the best, the fastest. So it's also a question of time. We have an opportune moment. It's now. It's not in 6 years, in 10 years. In 10 years, things will stabilize again with new relations, international relations.
leçons. Voilà. On est une bonne tête de bouc émissaire. Plus que les Américains, hein. Beaucoup plus que les Américains.
And the Europeans,
voilà, il faut apprendre cette gestion du risque. Il faut réapprendre la solidarité.
we have to learn the management of risk. We have to learn to work with people who don't think like us. So there's a great intellectual challenge, you've understood it. But it's a challenge that's very stimulating. It's a challenge that our grandparents took up. They lived like in that. They lived in much more difficult things and much more complex things, and they survived. We need courage, we need solidarity. But we have to have this intelligence to understand that the world, which is now ours, it's not tomorrow's world, it's today's world. It's not the world I knew still 10 years ago. And we will not go backwards. So let's get out of our sofas and leave Netflix and start thinking and imagine. And imagine solutions. There's lots. We can cry and think, oh my God, we would have been much better if everything had continued. First of all, it's not true. The world wasn't going the right way, and we can talk about that. But it's useless to cry. We need to look and find solutions, get out of our comfort zones and find solutions. That's why I came to talk to you. Thank you for your attention.
Michel Leluyer, ancien de l'Hydro et réserviste. En tant que réserviste,
as a reservist,
à l'intention également des futurs réservistes,
and I'm also speaking to future reservists. And when we listen to you, we realize that the European Union is a construction from the past.
L'attachement, je dirais, patriotique, comment se construit-il?
How do we today build our patriotic attachment?
Le chef d'état-major de la marine nous parlait comment dire, du destin de nos fils, éventuellement. Qu'est-ce qu'il faut en penser aujourd'hui?
Est-ce qu'il y a une autre question? Parce que je n'aurai malheureusement qu'un temps de réponse, parce qu'il faut après que je file à toute vitesse.
Docteur Saladin, membre de la Société française des neurosciences. Actuellement, les neurosciences sont en train
Today, neurosciences are giving man his working model that will allow him to come out of the obstacles that man has made 4,000 civilizations. They've all fallen. What has changed is knowledge. What has changed, now we know what's in our brain.
N'espère pas beaucoup qu'elle puisse germer, mais je tente l'affaire.
S'il y a un étudiant, un jeune étudiant qui voudrait poser une question, il peut. Hein. Ou vous allez dire peut-être pas d'accord, hein. C'est comme une question, hein. Ça ne gêne pas.
Bonjour monsieur, merci, c'était absolument passionnant. Yann Alix de la Fondation C'est Facile. Une question, le secteur privé dans tout ça.
And what about the private sector and all that? 50% of the container vessels belongs to Europe. Greek families continue to own a lot of the fleet. Is that the world of before, or do they still have an influence on what you are saying? So first of all, the possible futures are many. We don't know what tomorrow is made of. Before, we didn't think about the future. It wasn't about what, it was just about how. Now we don't even know the what. How are we going to do this? No, well, we don't know. Because I talk with many think tanks and everybody has their equation, everybody sees what I've just said, but then the possible futures, everybody has the best future for himself, anyway, the one that corresponds to the best to his own way of thinking, his own internal software. So I can't read in the future, especially today. But what I do know is that the past softwares must be completely thought over. I think European has a reason to be, but if Schumann and Monet lived today, they wouldn't create the same Europe. Because Europe was constructed for France and Germany to stop going to war. And that's why we built Europe. I am the first generation that doesn't have doesn't have a brother who was killed by a German, whereas in the previous generation it was the case. But before, Europe was the king of the world. The threat was inside. Today, the Europeans between themselves don't want to fight anymore, but now the threat is outside and we're not the kings of the world anymore. It's not because the Spaniards don't want to die for the Estonians. That doesn't mean that there's no meaning to Europe. It just means there are things that are national and things that are European and things that are Mediterranean. And France is a country that has pieces of France a bit everywhere. We have our own software. So we need to also learn to work with people who are completely different and don't want our model. If we just want to work with our model, we'll work with very few people, I guarantee that. People used to run behind our model, now they don't anymore. The question is, how do we live in a world with others? And in order to understand others, we have to understand who we are. In order to say them, we have to say we. And we Europeans, we French, we've tried to go beyond that. Identity is considered archaic. But today, everywhere, identity is coming back. In Ivory Coast, I'm sure it's the same question. We are from Ivory Coast, but what does it mean to be from Ivory Coast? It's a real question. It's a question everywhere. So we need to answer that question. It's a big challenge. It's not just economical. Everything. In China, there's no private world. Everybody obeys Xi Jinping. Here, we have a different model. We have to reinvent a model that's ours. And for that, I believe we should get inspiration from the European DNA. Our grandparents were not stupid. So what was their strength? So we're not going backwards. We're not copy-pasting. We need to look at what worked well and adapt it to today's world and see who we are. Because in fact, we are inheriting centuries and centuries of thinking and history that has been the strength of this continent that led to the Great Convergence. But things didn't happen as we expected. We could talk about it for hours. But if I want to encapsulate whether it's the private world, the private sector, neurosciences, or Europe, time has come to think. What counts is to think about who we are, who are the others, how do we cohabit, 8 billion people on this planet, with as much harmony as possible and sustainably, and still preserve our vision, our way of living, what for us is important. There are things that are very important. There are things that are not important. Let's stop fighting for things that are not important and accept to live with people who don't have the same way of living and not the same objective. And let's find a modus operandi, which sometimes will include conflict. Thank you for your attention and enjoy the day.